A warm welcome. You're tuned in to Eye on Africa. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Buyai. These are the top stories on the continent. Uganda hands down 5 life sentences to the perpetrators of twin bombings that rocked Kampala back in 2010, killing 76 people. 2 other accomplices received 50-year jail terms. We cross to our correspondent Michael O'Hagan in Kampala for the very latest. ECOWAS ministers meet in Abidjan for a regional security summit. This a day after Ivorian authorities arrested a man with suspected links to March's deadly attack on the Grand Bassam beach resort. And release them or charge them. Amnesty International criticises South Sudan for holding dozens of prisoners in metal containers amid scorching temperatures. The rights group says the conditions amount to torture. We begin in Uganda, where a court has handed down 5 life sentences to the perpetrators of the 2010 twin bombings, in Kampala that killed 76 people. While 2 other accomplices received 50-year jail sentences for the attacks which targeted fans watching the World Cup final at a restaurant and at a rugby club in the Ugandan capital. Of 13 men on trial, 7 were found guilty. The attacks were claimed by Somalia's rebel group Al-Shabaab. Here's what the judge presiding over the case had to say.
With regard to each of the counts in the offences of terrorism, murder and attempted murder, Hussein Hassan Agade, raise your hands up. Idris Magondo, Isa Ahmed Ruyima, Abid Suleiman Joroge, and Mohammed Ali Mohammed are each sentenced to life imprisonment. They will each spend the remainder of their lives in prison.
Well, look, let's stay with this story. To get the very latest, our correspondent Michael O'Hagan is in Kampala. We can cross live to him. Michael, good evening. Now, you were in court today. We understand the atmosphere was pretty tense, to say the least.
Yes, that's right. There was a wide expectation that some of the convicts would be sentenced to death by hanging. And today there was extensive arguments from the judge, who really wanted to examine the key issues around the death penalty. He really started from first principles and wanted to hear about the rights and wrongs, about the effectiveness, about retribution, the nature of the state. And when it came to the point at which he delivered his sentence, nobody knew for sure what kind of sentence he would give. And I think people were surprised that none of the convicts were sentenced to death, but they were given extremely long sentences. They'll spend the rest of their lives in jail.
This is a very particular case, Michael. What reason did the judge give for not choosing to hand down the death sentence?
The judge drew on very many themes from Old Testament biblical teachings through to quotations from Karl Marx, through to contemporary human rights considerations. In coming to his decision, he really wanted to address what it would mean to society, to the victims, and to the perpetrators. Who he also asked court whether we shouldn't consider the perpetrators to be a form of victim in this as well. But this is not a soft judge. He has previously sent people to the gallows, and he was prepared to do so in this case, but he wasn't persuaded at all that it would be the right thing for Ugandan society to see these men hang.
OK, Michael O'Hagan keeping us up to date from the Ugandan capital for now. Thank you. Well, time for a look at some other stories making headlines on the continent. Following 8 years in the clear, officials in Cameroon say the H5N1 strain of the bird flu virus has returned to the Central African nation. Authorities say at least 1 person's receiving treatment in hospital, while thousands of birds have died since last week. 20,000 others are scheduled to be killed at a farm in the capital, Yaoundé. The government has announced plans to send health officials to several regions in search of other suspected bird flu cases. In Guinea-Bissau, backers of the governing party have burned tyres and thrown stones at the presidential palace amid anger over the appointment of a new prime minister. Demonstrators accuse President José Mario Vaz of behaving unconstitutionally by naming Bassirou Dadja as Prime Minister himself and not allowing the governing party to do so. President Vaz has been at loggerheads with the party since 2015 when he fired a previous Prime Minister. And South Korea's leader has urged African nations to back international efforts to denuclearise North Korea. Addressing the African Union in Addis Ababa, President Park Geun-hye said in return her government would help Africa fight extremism. Park's visit to the AU was the first for a South Korean leader. She's also due to visit Uganda and Kenya. Next on the continent, President Alassane Ouattara and Macky Sall were among ministers from the Economic Community of West African States meeting in the Ivorian capital Abidjan this Friday. Why? Well, for a crucial security summit. The region's been hit by several terror attacks over the last few months and the threat remains high. Today's summit comes a day after Ivorian authorities said they'd arrested another man with suspected links to a deadly attack at the Grand Bassam beach resort back in March. The latest, France 24's Arnaud Froger was at the summit.
The Economic Community of West African States is getting ready to fight terrorism. 9 ECOWAS ministers have been attending a security meeting today here in Abidjan on Thursday. As you know, the Ivorian security forces arrested a driver who allegedly transported the weapons used in the Grand Bassam attack. According to Ahmed Bakayoko, the Ivorian Interior Minister, the same vehicle has been seen in both Bamako and Ouagadougou just days before the attacks in these two cities. So it seems now obvious that all these attacks in Western Africa are all connected to one another and that new security measures are required.
La menace est devenue une réalité, donc il ne s'agit plus de...
The threat has become a reality. We can no longer procrastinate. Those measures need to be taken. We realized after looking at the terrorist plans that they were able to move around thanks to fake ID. So, a measure we are going to propose is to secure borders by ensuring everyone has a biometric ID.
So far, about 20 people suspected of link to the Grand Bassam attack have been arrested here in Côte d'Ivoire, but the alleged mastermind is still at large.
Arnaud Froger there in the Ivorian capital. Amnesty International has warned that dozens of prisoners in South Sudan are being held in conditions which they say are tantamount to torture. According to the rights group, several detainees have died after being held in cramped metal containers with temperatures reaching up to 40 degrees Celsius. Well, South Sudan has yet to comment. Amnesty, though, has called for all prisoners to be either released or charged, as France 24's Ben Barnier reports.
Dozens of people locked inside shipping containers under the scorching sun. For the second time in recent months, Amnesty International sounds the alarm about South Sudan's illegal detention centers. The NGO says authorities have been holding prisoners inside containers in Leer and Gorum, resulting in multiple deaths.
Shipping containers in South Sudan are often used as kind of ad hoc places of detention or shelter. This becomes extremely problematic when there isn't sufficient ventilation cut into the shipping containers, like windows. Given the extreme temperatures in South Sudan, they become basically like ovens. And then you add on top of that lack of adequate food or water and beatings. I think you can see that these are inhuman conditions.
According to the NGO, most of the detainees are political prisoners. Amnesty International published several reports with testimonies, but the government denies the NGO's allegations.
Our understanding is that these people have been detained because there is some suspicion of them having a link with the SPLM-IO, the opposition, but they haven't been charged. The peace agreement provides for the release of all individuals who are detained in association with the conflict. So we believe that based on the peace agreement, all of these people should be released.
More than 2 years after the civil war broke out, rebel leader Riek Machar returned to Juba to form a unity government with President Salva Kiir. But in many parts of the country, arbitrary detentions, violence and the humanitarian crisis continue unabated.
And finally, Nigeria's table tennis star Segun Toriola is to make history at the Olympics in Rio this summer when he becomes the first African athlete to compete in 7 consecutive games. The 4-time All-Africa Games champion qualified in February after beating the Togolese player Mawusi Agbetolo. 41-year-old Toriola made his debut at the Olympics back in 1992. That was in Barcelona. He says his heart's set on bringing home a medal for Nigeria. Have a listen.
I always train very hard and always program myself because it's very important to program myself in my activities, anything I'm doing in this life. And I think what's really helped me is because I focus and I work very hard. I train very hard. I don't joke with my training. So I think this is the most important thing for any athlete.
Your Africa team is back in 45 minutes' time. Up next, though, more international headlines. Do stay tuned.